I want to talk about a blog post that you wrote in 2016. And you wrote, I quote, "It's time to start another chapter in my personal life." And that next personal chapter was your gender transition from male to female. And you're undergoing that right now. And I mean, the idea of being a leader of a company and leading a team of people and like going through that process. One thing that's really interesting is at the time in your blog post, you wrote that you have amazing support from your team and, you know, it won't mean any changes for the company.
Right.
And I have to wonder if there are just things that you are, maybe there have been some changes that you didn't anticipate in some way.
There are.
I'd love
for
to
sure.
anything that you might want to share.
Yeah, totally. So, you know, it's pretty much impossible to go through a gender transition and not expect some changes from people around you or yourself, right? It's just too big of a process for anyone to assume that like it's all just business as usual every day. It's not, because, you know, God bless humans, if you will, but people, you know, it's like people are people, and people have unconscious biases, and they fall into these weird traps, and they could be the most beautiful of souls, and they can still fall into these really nasty things that they don't even realize they're doing because they are now perceiving you as female instead of male, for instance. And so I have this joke that I use. Again, it's kind of like a little bit of an experiment. I like to experiment a little bit, as you can tell, but I have found, since presenting female and being perceived as female more, my voice isn't quite there yet, so I do often get misgendered, but once I open my mouth. But, you know, as I walk through an airport or something, I usually don't have too many problems. But I do find that I get treated differently if I am taller or shorter than the person I'm talking to physically. So based on the height of the shoes I'm wearing, I actually get treated differently, which is super interesting.
That didn't happen when you
This wasn't even
male.
a thing as a male, right? So, you know, and it's not always condescending. It's just different. It's either complacent or dismissive. It's these different things. And, you know, I have to be careful of my own unconscious biases, because we all have them, where I could be like being overly sensitive to differences in how people are working or talking to me, when it might just be one of those days for them, right? So I have to make sure that there's another balance on my side. But there is certainly some changes that have happened. But I had to, you know, when I came out as transgender, I was in the middle of a fundraising cycle for the company, which is when you raise money for making sure you have money in the bank.
Right.
And this is meeting with, you know, with all respect to all of our investors who I love dearly, and they're very good. And all the investors that did not invest in us, who are also very good, you know, they all look the same, which is a lot like what this entire podcast is about, is that they are often white, they're often male, they're often older. They're often wealthy. They often have backgrounds in technology or finance.
A lot of them have very similar types of backgrounds.
Exactly.
Maybe you went to the same kinds of schools,
Ivy League,
you know,
etc. Yeah,
they all know each other. They all have the same
golf
networks, all
club.
that,
Exactly. So, you know, and that's not a dig on them. That's just a fact. And so, going through a gender transition during pitching to folks like this, I knew in my head that this could go really south really fast. And not even necessarily because they're terrible people, but because we all have unconscious biases and we can fall into those without even knowing. And so I made a choice. I had come out to close friends and family, spouse, etc., about a year before that. And as I started the process of fundraising, I stayed in presenting male. Even though I was on hormones for 6 months, 7 months at that time, and, you know, things were starting to change. I was starting to not be able to hide things anymore.
Wow.
Right? But I insisted that, and the reason I chose this is because I did not want to bet the company on random investors' unconscious biases. It wasn't worth it to me. And so I said, I'm going to, you know, play the part, if you will, wear the costume for 6 more months. And it's supposed to take 6 months to raise, and it took me 9. So it's like, you know, at the end there, it was getting really hard to actually, you know, still show up as a dude, because it was like, you know, it things don't work the same, I guess is the best way to put it. You know, the body responds to hormones in certain ways. Everybody's does. And that's getting to the point where it's like it was not really able to be presenting as male fully anymore. And so it was really wonderful, though, because as soon as we closed the round, meaning like we finished raising, we had one more big company, major company, Intel Capital, who was going to put a big chunk of money in, and they had not committed yet. And I had to come out at this point, because it was like, I can't do this anymore. And people are starting to ask and talk and stuff. And so I decided to let all of the investors know through this blog post, as you mentioned. And I knew I could lose intel because I was like, like they could just be like, what? You misrepresented or weird or who knows? All my thoughts were thinking terrible things. So I call up my contact there. He's a wonderful guy named Pat. And I said, hey, I got to talk to you about a personal thing. We talked on the phone for a little while. And of course, what he says is you can never expect what people say. You're always wrong. What he says is he said, I really wish you would have told me earlier because we have a whole diversity fund. We could have actually got this done faster.
Right.
Like,
yeah.
Of course. So like there I go trying to like think things through too much, right? You can't judge what people will say or do. And that's been a common theme through this whole process, but It's been amazing. And it's like, I'm very proud of that. I don't want to hide it. I don't expect to hide it. I'm very out about it. I think that there were people in my life who I knew of or had read about who gave me the inspiration to move forward in my process. And if this can help ratchet that forward for someone else, then all the better. And it's just kind of a pay it forward sort of thing for me. Yeah. So.
Do you feel a little bit like a trailblazer here?
That feels awfully hubristic.
Yeah.
I like to say that I'm just standing on the shoulders of giants, like, the Martine Rothblatts and the Kate Bornsteins and the, Julia Serranos. These are amazing women who have done a lot of great work. And there's lots of amazing trans men as well who have just really, they've trailblazed, to be quite honest. I get an easier path because of the work they've done. Maybe someone will look back and be like, yeah, I trailblazed too. Fine. That's maybe not. I don't know yet. But I hope that if there's one person out there who's like, oh man, I've really struggled with this and I can actually run a company and a startup, I can raise money while transitioning, maybe I can be that one example that shows a counter example to what everyone thought was impossible.